The question to those who were declared missing: what happened to you? I left home, where I was being treated poorly, leaving a note where I clearly wrote about my intention never to return. An hour or two later, they called me from the police station and informed me that they had received a missing person report about me. I explained all the circumstances to them, and they wished me good luck. Since I was of legal age, I had the right to leave. This was 3 years ago. I had an emotional breakdown in 2015 after I lost my job. And overall, it was a tough year, so I packed my things in a backpack, got on my motorcycle, and drove to another city to clear my head. I took enough money to last a week, turned off my cell phone, and left. For a whole week, I relaxed on the beach, hung out, went to bars and clubs, and stayed in a hostel. I talked to other hostel guests, and overall, it was an amazing week. I relaxed well, I gathered myself and drove home, and at one intersection, the cops stopped me. It turned out that 2 of my former colleagues, whom I had seen after I was fired, were worried about me and came to my place to check on me. My housemates said they hadn't seen me for several days. They started looking for me all over the city and then reported my disappearance to the police. The police checked my records, my phone activity, saw that I hadn't appeared on social media for a long time, found out that I hadn't called relatives for a long time, and while I was trying to distract myself from my shitty life, everyone was thinking the worst. The police circulated my motorcycle's license plate number, and when I drove onto the highway, it must have lit up on the patrol officer's computer, so they stopped me. The cop was polite. He just wanted to make sure I was okay. He called the dispatcher and asked to remove me from the missing persons list. In Australia, a person is only excluded from the missing persons list after a police officer has personally seen the missing person. 8 hours later, I returned home and saw that a lot of people were worried about me. To be honest, I thought everyone would be indifferent to my disappearance. Otherwise, I definitely would have left a note. I work in an ambulance, and once we went on a call to a person who complained of pain in his legs. We arrived at a very polite young guy who was sitting on the side of the road. He had huge blisters on his feet. He said that he had gone to a relative's funeral, got very upset, and decided to walk to clear his mind. So he just kept walking and walking for 4 whole days. It turned out he lived in the same place he grew up, 400 kilometers from here. We talked about that village, about the good local pubs, and so on. He admitted that he had a slight depression and that he possibly needed professional help. He had disappeared before, but only for a few days. He has paranoid schizophrenia, and he often suffers from hallucinations. We live in New York. Our parents had no idea where to look for him. For a year, we constantly went to the police for body identification. He had no friends or girlfriend where he could go. My brother just disappeared. A year later, we got a call from a hospital in Washington. My brother was picked up on the street in a very emaciated condition. It turned out he had traveled to Washington to warn the government about some threat. Because of his illness, he refused food because he believed it was poisoned. The only reason he was still alive was because the homeless cared for him. He looked nothing like himself when he was found, covered in flea bites. Now my brother is physically healthy, which cannot be said about his mental health. At least he hasn't tried to run away again. Whenever I see homeless people on the street, I always remember this case. I went on a 3-week vacation. During the second week, my boss called me and asked if I was okay because the police had called him saying a missing person report had been filed about me. My neighbor filed the report because she was worried that she hadn't seen me for a week. I was even pleased. At least now you know for sure that you have good neighbors. One of my first memories is about getting lost when I was 5 years old. My family went on holiday to Scotland. We ended up in some hole where there was almost nothing but forest all around. There were no special entertainments, so my sister and I decided to play hide and seek. I had the brilliant idea to hide right opposite the front door of the cottage where we were staying, under a huge bush. I watched my sister look for me for about 5 minutes. Then she obviously gave up and went inside. However, I don't give up so quickly, so I decided to sit in the bushes until I was found. After a short period of time, 15 minutes or so, more people started participating in the game. My parents ran back and forth, and I watched them and giggled, thinking how great I was for hiding so well. More and more people joined the game. There were vacationers from other cottages, park staff, and police officers. I just sat in the bushes. Many hours passed, it got dark, and I enjoyed the game. My sister was only 7 years old, so she wasn't participating in the search. She was just sitting on the porch. As darkness fell, my yellow jacket started to stand out. And finally, after searching for me all day, throughout the entire forest, my sister realized I was sitting right across from her. The best game of hide-and-seek of my entire life. I don't remember how old we were, probably about 10. My friend and I decided to collect fallen leaves from our neighbors' yards for money. We went from house to house and offered our services for $5. Eventually, we went around so many houses that we reached some kind of intersection and realized we didn't know where we were because we had never left our block. Then it got dark. We couldn't read the street names or distinguish anything familiar in the dim light of the street lamps. Eventually, as we were walking, not knowing where we were going, we heard the sound of a police siren and saw the lights of a police car. Cops stopped near us and asked our names. They put us in their car and took us home. To us 10-year-old boys, it seemed like we drove for a very long time, although we only drove 4 blocks. Oh, and we got yelled at by our parents for that. They also took away our hard-earned money. This happened about 10 years ago. I had just moved to California with my ex, now husband. Our downstairs neighbor was a crazy addict who constantly bothered us and caused trouble with us. Once, the upstairs neighbor decided to renovate his apartment. The downstairs neighbor then ran up to us and started threatening us because she thought I was the one making the noise. It was impossible to reason with her. Every time I left the house, I tried to do it as quietly as possible, so she wouldn't go into our apartment and take over while no one was home. Anyway, I wrote an anonymous complaint to the building management and reported her to the police. It turned out she had many complaints filed against her. My husband picked me up from the police, and we went to lunch. Those idiots from the building management went to the neighbor and relayed all my complaints. When we returned, she was banging on our door and screaming. We just left. To hell with her. We went to Walmart, bought a tent and stuff, and drove to Yosemite for the weekend to clear our heads. We managed to sneak quietly back into the apartment, slept a bit, and whispered to the neighbor that we were leaving for a weekend camping trip. After that, I texted my mom, brother, and sister, but for some reason, only my sister received my message. During my last phone conversation with my mom, I told her about the downstairs neighbor who had threatened me. After that, I disappeared. We returned only 4 days later. My voicemail was filled with desperate messages from my mother and brother. They had contacted the police, saying that the downstairs neighbor killed us, made masks out of our skin, and wore them. Mom didn't believe the neighbor's words that we went camping. She thought this neighbor was covering for the other neighbor because her daughter never liked camping. That's true, it was my first time camping ever. After 3 days of anxiety and suffering, they finally called my sister to inform her that I had been murdered. My sister laughed and said that I was camping. Mom fell silent and then replied that she had decided for some reason, She wrote me a message. Why didn't you call me when you started thinking she was murdered? When we drove home and I got signal, I listened to all those messages and immediately called my parents, and then the police to cancel the missing persons report. Years later, I tried to joke about it. Hey, remember when you thought the neighbor killed us? It was just a crazy weekend. No one laughs yet. Maybe it's still too soon. My favorite story on this topic involves my cousin. He was 4 years old. We were vacationing at the beach with the whole family. At some point, he just disappeared. We searched for several hours and called the police. It turned out that he went to a hotel 2 minutes from the beach to poop, met other kids there, and started playing with them. All the adults thought he was the son of the hotel guests. He even had lunch there when the table was set. While we were already ready to hire divers to look for him at the bottom of the sea, I checked into a rehabilitation clinic. I don't know why I didn't warn anyone, but I was an addict and wasn't thinking straight. My boyfriend, now ex, was the only person who knew about it. About a week later, the hospital registry called me and said that my mother was bothering them, demanding information about me and stating that I had been missing for a month. She was exaggerating. By law, they were not allowed to disclose information about me, so they asked me to call my mom and explain everything. When I got out, I saw messages from many people asking if I was alive. Even people from my old job wrote. It turned out that my best friend and my brother wrote to my ex-boyfriend, but he ignored them and also failed to inform me that they were looking for me. If he had told me, I would have asked him to tell them where I was, and all this fuss could have been avoided. I felt very awkward that I made so many people worry needlessly. When I was about 6 years old, my family and I were on vacation in Yosemite. We stayed at a small campground. There I met a kid who was a little older than me, and we set off to explore the surroundings. We wandered too far and met a bear cub in the forest. We just stood and stared at each other for a few minutes. Then we went our separate ways. When we returned to the camp, park rangers were already searching for us intensely. My parents were going crazy. For some reason, my bear story didn't seem as cool to them as it did to me. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new super interesting discussions. Well, in the meantime, we suggest watching our other videos. People who went missing for a while, what happened? Once, I went to a party with friends at a college dorm. I didn't have a mobile phone back then, up until 2004, because in those days, every dorm room had landlines. Eventually, a guy invited me over. We went to his place and slept together. Waking up the next day, I checked my email on his computer and saw an unbelievable number of messages from my friends. They decided that I had been drugged and kidnapped. Another possibility was that I had killed myself. At the time, I was suffering from depression. As it turned out later, they filed a missing person report with campus security, and some of my friends even went into the woods to look for me. For those too lazy to read, my friends think someone would sooner kidnap me than I would go out. Comment from campus police employee. I work in the campus police department and constantly deal with these situations. More than half of the cases where friends or roommates report someone missing end up with the discovery that the victim simply went off to their boyfriend or girlfriend, so you're not the only one. But seriously, don't be afraid to report that kind of stuff, such shit to the police. Because it might turn out that you were right and it really was a kidnapping. One night, when I was about 10 years old, I started sleepwalking, opened the front door, and wandered off into the neighborhood. I only woke up several hours later, standing barefoot in the middle of an unfamiliar dead-end street. I was scared shitless, scared to death. It ended with me running through the streets until I finally found my way home. My parents, my folks, also totally freaked out, laid bricks while trying to find me. After that incident, they installed a lock on my door, and my moonlight walks came to an end. I had a similar thing happen. I woke up only in my underwear, standing on the pathway outside our house in mid-January. It's quite cold in Montana at that time. I was really scared and started banging on the door for my parents to open it. Correction, we had a strange old-fashioned door that opened from the inside, but if you were outside, you needed a key. Most likely, I slid the bolt but didn't turn the lock in the handle, and that's why the door closed when I went out. I know a guy who sleepwalked out of a second-story window and broke his wrist. My cousin also started sleepwalking and went missing. Her parents woke up at night. She wasn't in bed. They went outside to look for her, but everything was clear, all clear. They called the cops. The police officer immediately asked if they had searched the house. No, they hadn't. It turned out she was sleeping in the closet in the hallway. This happened during winter break when I was a college freshman. My boyfriend broke up with me. I was depressed and just wanted to be alone. I had a decent amount of cash, normal cash, so I rented a hotel room for 2 weeks, stocked up on food and everything necessary, turned off my cell phone, cut out the mobile phone, and didn't even go outside. Upon returning home, my whole family yelled at me for several hours, and I had 200 missed calls and 500 messages on my phone. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. I would only recommend this to those who hate their whole family. While serving in the U.S. Armed Forces, I experienced dissociative amnesia that lasted 12 days. It all started on a regular Sunday evening. I was doing laundry, preparing to report for duty. In the next moment, in the next shot, I woke up 12 days later in my room, being shaken by my commander. And it turned out that for those entire 12 days, no one had seen or heard from me. The most interesting thing is that I wasn't a loner. On the contrary, I was very outgoing and always visible. The fact that I was missing for 12 days is simply a miracle. To avoid answering comments, I was charged with unauthorized absence from duty, went under Article 15. It ended with me being discharged for medical reasons with a compensation of $25,000, and the psychiatrist said the Armed Forces VS no longer needed me. I had no explanation for what happened. I shake after taking various pills and treatments. Doctors couldn't figure out my brain. They say this rarely happens after 25, but it happened to me. When they gave me a head CT scan, KT of the head, doctors said that I have one cavity that everyone has, but mine is larger than in other people. But I don't want to delve into it, and I really don't want to know if I took off to France during that time and was killed things body, pretending to be a transvestite, or just ran off somewhere, screwed off somewhere for 2 weeks. I had no reason to desert. At that point, I had already served for 6 years. I had been to Saudi Arabia, South Korea, France, Spain, and at that time, I was in Germany. I fucking loved the service. I loved the service like shit and would like to do it again. Please, read the comments to confirm that I was a good soldier who would never desert. I got lost in the city when I was 4 years old, and I was rescued by teenagers whom my father took for a gang. We were having dinner with another family in Chinatown. Besides the adults, there were 5 of us children. After dinner, we all held hands and crossed the road, but for some reason, my older brother let go of my hand. Because of this, when the light turned green and everyone crossed the road, I remained on the other side of the crossing. I just got distracted looking into the large window of a barbershop, where some huge guy was having his head shaved. I can still recall that scene in detail. When I finally looked around, the others were gone, and I started crying. But then a group of teenagers approached me and asked if I was lost. I answered yes. Then a tall guy put me on his shoulders, and we started walking down the street. The rest of the guys decided to split up and go in different directions. When we turned the corner, I saw my father. He was completely pale and rushed towards us. The guy put me down on the ground. There were still a few other guys with us. They stood awkwardly nearby while the tall guy explained to my father what had happened. My dad, who generally never showed his emotions, embraced the guy on impulse on emotions, embraced the guy, and my mom came over and took my hand. Years later, my father told me that he had already seen those kids that day when he was parking near the restaurant and had thought they were some kind of gang. After everything happened, he felt awkward about his thoughts and since then tried not to judge people by first impressions. I would really like to thank them, but it was a long time ago. Actually, putting you on his shoulders was a smart move. Gangsters also have hearts. I have a similar story. I was walking with my parents at the zoo, and they had quite intolerant opinions about black people dark-skinned. I was 3 years old at the time, and I didn't quite understand what was what. Anyway, I saw a large spiral slide shaped like a snake, we call it Exmica here, and decided I wanted to go there. My parents were talking about something, so they didn't notice me leave. On the way to the slide, I got completely lost. When my parents found me, I was in the company of a large black woman dark-skinned lady who had been walking with me all over the zoo, trying to find them. My mother and father both gave her a tight hug, and this incident completely changed their opinions about black people. It's nice to see how kindness destroys false beliefs. In 2010, I went hiking to see a volcanic eruption. I managed to get there before the flights were canceled. But on the way back, I got separated from the group. There were about 8 or 10 of us, including my good friend. Generally, I move pretty fast, especially when descending a mountain, but this was March. It gets dark early in Iceland at that time, and, naturally, I didn't have a flashlight. So after just half an hour, I was in pitch darkness. I decided to follow the same path we took going up. This was an incredibly stupid idea because the path ran about 5 meters away from a 15-meter drop into a canyon. Furthermore, the path was near a waterfall, so there was thick fog the entire way. And let's not forget it was March in Iceland, so the temperature was around -5 degrees Celsius, not accounting for the cold wind. So, the trail turned into a real skating rink with a 45-degree incline. The experience was incredible. It took about 5 hours before I managed to descend and find the rest. As it turned out later, I was one of 20 people who got lost that Saturday. 2 of them died. The Icelandic Search and Rescue Service had an enormous amount of work. Those days it was just in crazy. Just wow. 2 died. 20 people got lost. It looks like no one bothered with planning this hike at all. Explanation about the deceased. Let me explain for the slow ones. For the short-sighted, the people who died. A man and a woman, about 45 to 50 years old. They wanted to drive up. Not only did they have a Suzuki Grand Vitara, which is not very suitable for such a trip, but it was also on all-season tires. Obviously, they got stuck at some point. The man went for help and left the woman with her friend in the car. When he was gone for too long, she went looking for him or anyone who could help. And since they weren't dressed for the weather, both ended up freezing to death. Essentially, almost everyone who got lost, whether tourists or locals, was dressed too lightly. I saw several locals wearing ordinary sneakers on their feet. I was about 2 or 3 years old. This happened on the beach when my father, brother, and I were camping. I was just walking back and forth, collecting bird feathers. At some point, Dad and my brother, along with the other people from the campsite, returned to the camp. But I just stayed to continue collecting feathers. After a while, my father realized he had forgotten me on the beach, panicked, rushed back, and found me right there with a pile of feathers in my hands. It wasn't that I went missing. They just forgot about me. I once lost my father in a supermarket and totally panicked. I didn't know what to do next, so I just sat by the boxes of cereal and started crying. In my head, I was already imagining how no one would find me, how I would live under bridges or in abandoned houses, eating dead rats and insects to somehow survive. I was 8 then, but 5 minutes later, Dad walked past me with a cart and asked, "Well, what are you sitting here for?" Mom called, "We need to buy more milk." Everyone has a similar story. In high school, I went with the American football team to an away competition, after which they brought us back to school by bus. I was still too young to drive myself, so I had to wait for my parents to pick me up. I didn't have my cell phone because my parents had taken it away as punishment. I sat at school for an hour and a half, but no one came for me. In the end, I decided to walk home about 65 kilometers laden with all my football gear and textbooks. While I was trudging home, my mother arrived at the school. Seeing that I was missing, she panicked, found the coach, and told him about it. My coach immediately sent messages to the entire team asking if anyone knew where I was. When I came to school the next day, it turned out everyone thought the team bus had left without me. I was lost. Ultimately, this situation became our team's favorite joke that everyone laughed about for another year. Bonus, my parents never took my phone away as punishment again. Correction, responding to comments. Mom was visiting Dad in the hospital, but she didn't tell me about it and didn't warn me she might be late. Yes, I probably could have asked the coach to call her, but deep in my cunning teenage soul, I wanted to punish Mom for leaving me without a phone. A couple of years ago, I worked in Manhattan. The building where our office was located had 11 floors. One time, I went out for a smoke, and when I came back and called the elevator, there was a little blonde girl, about 11 years old, crying loudly inside. I asked her what was wrong. It turned out she didn't know English. I think she was speaking Polish, but I'm not sure. Without stopping crying, she stepped out of the elevator and just stared at me. Fear was visible in her eyes. I stepped away from the elevator with her, trying to figure out what was going on. She was wearing high heels and a very short skirt and also quite bright makeup. Over and over, she repeated, "7 and Uncle." I was completely confused and didn't know what to do at all. I happened to work on the 7th floor, so I decided to bring her to our office. I thought maybe someone there knew her, but no. Ultimately, I just walked with her from floor to floor, asking people if they knew who this child was, but no one had a clue. I had already lost all hope and was about to call the cops. But finally, we went up to the 11th floor, and it turned out that her uncle's office was there. Seeing him, she rushed towards him with screams and tears, and he looked at me as if I were some kind of pedophile. I quickly explained to him how everything had actually happened. It later turned out that her aunt had brought her, told her the wrong floor, and then immediately left. The poor thing was very scared. Thank you very much for watching. In the comments, people who were missing for a while, write what happened, and don't forget to watch our other episodes.